Logic says a person cannot just evaporate. Matter doesn't disappear. But in Texas, the impossible happens more than you think. We are opening the files on 12 cases where the physical evidence simply stops. No bodies, no reasons, just silence. Some are famous, others are forgotten, but all of them are unsolved. Subscribe to the channel, lock your doors, and let's begin. It's December 23rd, 1974, Fort Worth, Texas. 2 days before Christmas, and Seminary South Shopping Center is absolutely packed. Picture this: families everywhere, kids tugging on their parents' sleeves, begging for one more toy. The air smells like popcorn from the concession stand, mixed with that synthetic pine scent they pump through the vents to make you feel festive. The parking lot is chaos, cars circling like vultures, waiting for someone to back out so they can grab a spot. This is the height of the Christmas rush. Everyone's scrambling for last-minute gifts. The stores are playing Bing Crosby on loop. The Sears anchor store has a massive Santa display in the window. It's supposed to be the happiest time of the year. And for 3 girls from Fort Worth, it started out that way. Rachel Trelica was 17. A newlywed, actually. She'd married her husband Tommy just 5 months earlier, in July. She was a student at Southwest High School, responsible, the kind of girl you'd trust to drive. She was behind the wheel that day, piloting a massive 1972 Oldsmobile 98. We're talking about a boat of a car, greenish gold, heavy as a tank, the kind of vehicle that makes you feel safe. With her was Renee Wilson, 14 years old, Rachel's friend. Renee was wearing a pale yellow-green t-shirt with "Sweet Honesty" printed across the front and red and white sneakers. She was excited. They just picked up some jeans she had on layaway at an Army-Navy surplus store. Christmas was almost here. And then there was Julie Ann Mosley, 9 years old. Here's the thing about Julie Ann. She wasn't even supposed to be there. She was a neighbor, a friend of Renee's, and at the very last second, she asked if she could come along. Just wanted to tag along for the ride. What's the harm, right? It's a trip to the mall. So the 3 of them pile into that big Oldsmobile and head to Seminary South. Now, let's talk about the weather for a second, because it matters. It was cold that day. Temperatures started around freezing, 35 degrees Fahrenheit, and only climbed to about 55 by early afternoon. The sky was gray, overcast, that flat winter light that makes everything look washed out. No rain, no snow, just cold. By the time evening rolled around and the search began, it was dropping back into the 40s. The sun set at 5:28 p.m., so by 6 o'clock, when the families arrived at the mall in a panic, the parking lot was lit by those amber sodium lights. You know the kind. They make everything look slightly sinister. But let's rewind. The girls arrive at the mall sometime in the early afternoon. Witnesses see them. They're shopping. They're happy. Renee's got her jeans. They're picking up gifts. Everything is normal. And then they vanish. When the girls don't come home by their 4 p.m. curfew, the families start to worry. By 6 o'clock, they're at the mall, searching, and that's when they find the car. The 1972 Oldsmobile 98 is sitting in the upper-level parking lot, right near the Sears entrance. The doors are locked, no broken windows, no signs of a struggle. But here's the thing that should immediately make your brain start firing warning signals. The gifts are still inside. Renee's jeans from the Army-Navy store, in the car. A wrapped toy car, a Christmas present Renee bought for Rachel's stepson, sitting right there on the seat, still wrapped in holiday paper. The car is locked. The girls are gone. Now, this is where it gets strange. A few days later, December 24th, Christmas Eve, a letter arrives at Rachel's house. It's addressed to Thomas A. Trelica, not Tommy. Thomas, a name he rarely used. The letter is written in what people described as a childish scrawl. It says, "I know I'm going to catch it, but we just had to get away. We're going to Houston. See you in about a week. The car is in Sears' upper lot." The name Rachel is written in the upper left corner of the envelope. But here's the kicker. It's misspelled. And the postmark? Blurred. Could be Fort Worth. Could be nearby. But it was mailed locally. That much is clear. So let's stop right here. Let's talk about this letter, because this is where the runaway theory starts to fall apart like wet paper. First of all, handwriting analysis later suggested the letter was written by a right-handed person. Rachel Terlika was left-handed. Think about that. If Rachel didn't write the letter, who did? Second, the tone. We just had to get away. Really? Rachel was a 17-year-old newlywed. She'd been married 5 months. You don't get married in July and then run away to Houston in December because you just had to get away. That's not how newlyweds think. And Renee? She was 14. She just picked up jeans on layaway. She bought a Christmas present for Rachel's stepson. Does that sound like someone planning to disappear? And then there's Julianne. 9 years old. Do teenagers run away? Sure, it happens. But do they take a 9-year-old neighbor with them? A kid who only asked to tag along at the very last minute? Julianne didn't pack a bag. She didn't tell her parents she was leaving forever. She thought she was going to the mall. Here's another thing that doesn't add up. If you're planning to run away, if you're so desperate to escape your life that you're willing to vanish, you don't spend hours shopping for Christmas presents. Carefully lock them in your car and then leave them behind. You take the car, you take the money, you take the gifts and pawn them for cash. But the gifts were still there. The car was still there. The only thing missing was the girls. And let's talk about that letter one more time. It's 1974. Payphones are everywhere. They're on every corner, in every gas station, in every mall. If you want your parents to stop worrying, you pick up a phone and you call them. You don't write a letter that takes 3 days to arrive via the postal service. You don't mail something from Fort Worth and say, "See you in about a week," while your family is tearing the city apart looking for you. The letter doesn't make sense. The gifts don't make sense. The locked car doesn't make sense. So what happened in that parking lot? The upper deck of Seminary South wasn't some dark, isolated alley. It was a busy shopping center 2 days before Christmas. Cars everywhere, families walking in and out. The mall was packed. How do 3 girls, one of them 9 years old, vanish in broad daylight without anyone seeing anything? There are no screams, no signs of a struggle. No one reports seeing the girls being forced into another vehicle. The car is found locked, which means Rachel had time to lock the door. That suggests compliance. That suggests someone they trusted, or someone who had the authority to make them comply. Maybe someone in a uniform. Maybe someone they knew. Over the years, investigators have chased every lead. They've pulled rusted cars out of lakes, hoping to find the Oldsmobile with 3 bodies inside. They've followed up on deathbed confessions from old men claiming they knew what happened. They've analyzed the letter with every piece of technology available. In recent years, DNA testing found genetic material on the envelope that doesn't belong to Rachel, a genetic ghost waiting for a name. But there's no match in the database. The Seminary South Shopping Center doesn't exist anymore, by the way. It's been demolished and rebuilt as La Grande Plaza. The upper parking deck where the car was found is gone, paved over, erased. But the mystery isn't. 40-plus years later, the Fort Worth trio is still one of Texas's most haunting cold cases. 3 girls went Christmas shopping on a cold, gray Monday afternoon. They bought gifts, they locked their car, and then they stepped into the void. No bodies have ever been found. No conclusive evidence has ever surfaced. The letter remains a taunt, a piece of paper that raises more questions than it answers. Rachel Terlika would be in her 60s now if she's alive. Renee Wilson would be in her 50s. Julianne Mosley would be in her 40s. But no one has seen them. No one has heard from them. They vanished from a crowded parking lot in the middle of the Christmas rush, and the world swallowed them whole. The car sat there, locked and silent, surrounded by shoppers and holiday cheer. The gifts were inside, waiting to be opened. But the girls who bought them, they never came home. December 13th, 2020, Luling, Texas. If you've never been to Luling, let me paint you a picture. It's a small town about an hour south of Austin, famous for 2 things, barbecue and oil. During the day, you'll see those nodding donkey pump jacks scattered across the landscape, rhythmically pulling crude from the earth. At night, though? At night, Luling becomes something else entirely, especially out on Salt Flat Road. Salt Flat Road isn't a highway. It's not even really a proper road. It's a gravel service track that cuts through oil country. Dusty, uneven, surrounded by scrub brush and silence. There are no streetlights, no houses, just darkness and the mechanical heartbeat of those pump jacks in the distance. On the night of December 13th, that darkness was absolute. The moon was a waning crescent, barely 1 to 3% illuminated. Basically, no moon at all. If you stood on Salt Flat Road that night and held your hand in front of your face, you wouldn't see it. The kind of dark that presses against you. The kind of dark that makes you understand why our ancestors were afraid of the night. The temperature had dropped into the mid-30s Fahrenheit, hovering right around freezing, cold enough to see your breath, cold enough to make you want a jacket. And there was wind. December in Central Texas is breezy, and even a 10-mile-per-hour wind at 35 degrees drops the feels-like temperature significantly. This is the void that Jason Landry drove into. Jason was 21 years old, a student at Texas State University in San Marcos. By all accounts, he was a normal college kid, played video games, had a pet betta fish, smoked a little weed. Nothing crazy. He was driving home to Missouri City, a suburb of Houston, for the Christmas holidays. It should have been a simple trip, straight shot down Highway 80, but something went wrong. At 10:55 p.m., Jason left his apartment in San Marcos. Digital forensics show he was using the Waze navigation app, which tracked his route as he headed south on Highway 80. Everything seemed fine. He was making good time. Then, at 11:24 p.m., something changed. Jason reached the intersection of Hackberry Street and Austin Street in Luling, and this is where his digital footprint starts to get weird. He stopped using Waze. Instead, he opened Snapchat. That's the last digital trace of Jason Landry. 11:24 p.m., Snapchat open, and then silence. What happened in the next hour is a mystery. Somehow Jason made a series of turns, or mistakes, that led him off the main highway and onto Salt Flat Road, a gravel track in the middle of nowhere, not on the route to Missouri City, not on any reasonable path home. At 12:31 a.m., a volunteer firefighter was driving down Salt Flat Road and saw something in his headlights, a car. A gray 2000 Nissan Altima, nose down in a ditch, tangled in a barbed wire fence. The volunteer stopped. He approached the vehicle. The headlights were still on, cutting through the darkness. The engine was off, but the keys were in the ignition. The driver's door was locked. But the window was rolled down. Jason Landry was gone. Now, here's where this gets disturbing. The volunteer called the police. When investigators arrived and started processing the scene, they found something about 900 feet down the road from the crash site. Just sitting there in the middle of the gravel. A pile of clothes, not scattered by the wind, not torn off in a struggle, just placed there or dropped there. A t-shirt, shorts, socks, underwear, slide sandals, even his wristwatch. Jason Landry had stripped completely naked and walked away from his crashed car into the pitch-black Texas night. Let me say that again, because it's important. He took off every single piece of clothing, including his underwear and his watch, and walked away. In 35-degree weather, in the dark, on a gravel road surrounded by scrub brush and barbed wire. Why? The official theory, the one that law enforcement and search and rescue teams have focused on, is something called paradoxical undressing. It's a real phenomenon. It happens in the final stages of hypothermia. When your core body temperature drops dangerously low, your hypothalamus malfunctions. Blood vessels that have been constricted suddenly dilate, sending a rush of warm blood to your extremities. Victims feel an intense, overwhelming sensation of heat. They think they're burning up. So they strip off their clothes, even though they're actually freezing to death. It's tragic, it's well documented, and at first glance, it seems to fit. But here's the thing. Let's actually look at the facts. First, the temperature. It was cold that night, mid-30s. But it wasn't freeze to death in minutes cold. Hypothermia severe enough to cause paradoxical undressing typically requires prolonged exposure to extreme cold, or being wet, or being injured in a way that accelerates heat loss. Jason had crashed his car, sure, but there's no evidence he was seriously injured. A small blood smear was found on the clothing, but nothing suggesting catastrophic trauma. Second, the timeline. Paradoxical undressing happens in the late stages of hypothermia, right before death. It's one of the last things a victim does. They strip, they collapse, they die, usually within a very short radius of where they undressed. But Jason's clothes were found 900 feet from the car. That's 3 football fields. He didn't strip and collapse. He stripped and walked in the pitch black, barefoot on gravel. Think about that. Have you ever walked barefoot on gravel? It's excruciating. Now, imagine doing it in total darkness, naked, in freezing temperatures. Every step would be agony. And yet Jason walked at least 900 feet and possibly much, much farther. Despite massive search efforts, drones, helicopters, search dogs, ground teams combing the area for days, no body has ever been found. Now, let's talk about the phone. Jason's cell phone was found in the car. Some reports say it was inside the vehicle. Others say it was near it. Either way, it was at the crash site, not with Jason. If you crash your car in the middle of nowhere, in the dark, what is the first thing you grab? Your phone. It's your lifeline. It's your flashlight. It's your way to call for help. Even if it's damaged in the crash, even if the screen is cracked, you take it with you. Jason left it behind. Why would you leave your phone? Why would you strip naked, leave your only source of light and communication, and walk into absolute darkness? It doesn't make sense. And then there's the backpack. Jason's backpack was found near the vehicle. Inside was his wallet, his laptop, some gaming equipment, and a small amount of marijuana. If he was panicking, if he thought the police were coming and he was trying to run from a drug charge, why leave the evidence behind? Marijuana possession in Texas isn't great, but it's not abandon your car and flee naked into the wilderness serious. And if he was disoriented, hypothermic, trying to find help, why leave the wallet, money, ID, the things you need to survive? The volunteer firefighter who found the car arrived at 12:31 a.m. The last digital trace of Jason was at 11:24 p.m., just over an hour earlier. That's not a lot of time. Not enough time to get hopelessly lost. Not enough time under normal circumstances to develop life-threatening hypothermia. So what happened in that hour? Some people think Jason was running from something. Maybe he'd taken drugs, something stronger than weed, and was hallucinating. Maybe he was experiencing a psychotic break, but his friends and family say there was no history of mental illness, no indication he was using anything beyond recreational marijuana. Others think he was running to something, that he was meeting someone out there on Salt Flat Road. But who? And why? And if he was meeting someone, where did they go? Why didn't they call for help when he crashed? The most haunting detail, to me, is the betta fish. Jason was transporting his pet betta fish in a small tumbler. The fish was found dead at the scene. He was taking it home for the holidays, just like he was taking his laptop and his gaming equipment. He was a college kid going home for Christmas, and then he stripped off everything, his clothes, his identity, his future, and walked into the void. The searches continued for weeks. Volunteers combed the brush, drones equipped with thermal cameras flew grid patterns over the area, cadaver dogs were brought in. They found nothing. Not a body, not a bone, not a shred of fabric. It's as if Jason Landry simply dissolved into the darkness. Salt Flat Road is still there, of course. The gravel, the pump jacks, the endless scrub brush. If you drive down it at night, you'll understand why this case is so terrifying. The isolation is absolute. The darkness is complete. It's the kind of place where you could scream and no one would hear you. Jason's family is still looking for answers. They've hired private investigators. They've pushed for more searches. They've analyzed every detail of that night, trying to find the logic in the illogical. But the gravel road keeps its secrets. A 21-year-old college student drove into the dark and never came out. His car was found, with the lights still on, keys in the ignition, like he'd just stepped away for a moment. His clothes were found in a neat pile 900 feet down the road. And Jason? Jason walked into the Texas night, naked, alone, and silent, and vanished. No body, no answers, Just a pile of clothes on a gravel road and the echo of a question that will never be answered. Where did he go? January 10th, 2002, Georgetown, Texas. If you know Georgetown, you know it's the kind of town that feels safe. It's a suburb north of Austin, tree-lined streets, nice houses, neighborhoods where people know their neighbors. The kind of place where kids ride their bikes and parents don't lock their doors during the day. On the morning of January 10th, 2002, Georgetown was everything a small Texas town should be. The sky was clear. The temperature had started around 40 degrees Fahrenheit and was climbing toward a pleasant 62. It was cool enough for a light jacket, but perfect running weather. There was a breeze, about 14 to 15 miles per hour, rustling through the cedar trees, creating that white noise of a typical Texas winter morning. It was the kind of day where nothing bad is supposed to happen. Rachel Cook woke up that morning with a plan. She was 19 years old, home for winter break from San Diego Mesa College. She was athletic, a cross-country runner, and she'd kept up her routine even during the holidays. Every day she'd go out for her run. 4 miles, same route. It was predictable, familiar, safe. Rachel was 5'3", about 115 pounds. That morning she put on her running clothes, gray running shorts, a green sports bra, a white t-shirt, and white Asics running shoes. She grabbed her bright yellow Walkman, this was 2002, remember? So no iPods yet, and put the headphones on. Her parents had already left for work around 8 a.m. Rachel was still asleep then. By 9:30 she was ready to go. She stepped out of her house in the North Lake subdivision, locked the door behind her. Rachel was careful about things like that, and started her run. It was a route she'd done 100 times, through the neighborhood, looping around and back home. 4 miles, 45 minutes, maybe an hour depending on her pace. She looked normal, she looked happy. She was listening to music, probably lost in her own world the way runners are. And then, somewhere between the street and her front door, Rachel Cook vanished. Let me be specific about this because the details matter. At around 4 p.m. that afternoon, Rachel's father, Robert Cook, came home from work. He pulled into the driveway and immediately noticed something was off. The front door was unlocked. Now, this might not seem like a big deal, but Rachel was safety conscious. She always locked the door when she went out, always. But that day, the door was unlocked. Not broken, not forced, just unlocked. Robert walked inside. The house was quiet. Rachel's purse was there, her wallet, her keys, her cell phone, everything she would need if she were going somewhere, everything that indicated she'd planned to come back. But Rachel wasn't there. Robert called out. No answer. He checked her room. He checked the backyard. He started asking neighbors if they'd seen her. And here's where this case gets absolutely chilling. Multiple neighbors had seen Rachel that morning. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't running in the dark. This was 9:30 in the morning on a clear, bright day. People were outside. They were mowing their lawns, getting their mail, walking their dogs. One neighbor specifically remembered seeing Rachel running. She was wearing her gray shorts and green sports bra, her yellow Walkman clipped to her waistband, white headphones on. She looked normal. She waved. She smiled. And this neighbor saw her just 200 yards from her house. 200 yards. Let me put that in perspective for you. That's the length of 2 football fields. That's less than a 2-minute walk. If you're running, it's maybe 30 seconds. Rachel Cook was 30 seconds from safety. She could probably see her house. She was almost home. She was in her own neighborhood, surrounded by people who knew her on a bright winter morning. And then, she disappeared. No scream. No struggle. No blood. No dropped Walkman. No shoe left behind in the grass. Just gone. Now, here's the thing that should make your brain start screaming questions. How? How do you abduct someone in broad daylight in a residential neighborhood with witnesses around without anyone noticing? How do you grab a grown woman, an athlete in good shape, without her fighting back, without her screaming, without leaving a single piece of evidence? The police searched the area immediately. They brought in tracking dogs. They combed the route she would have taken. They knocked on every door in the neighborhood. They found nothing. No skid marks on the road. No signs of a vehicle stopping suddenly. No disturbed grass where someone might have been dragged. No dropped belongings. It was as if Rachel had simply evaporated between one footstep and the next. But people don't just evaporate. So what happened? The prevailing theory is what's called a blitz attack. This is when an abductor uses overwhelming force and speed to subdue a victim before they can react. We're talking seconds. A van pulls up, the door slides open, someone grabs you and pulls you inside before you can even process what's happening. It's fast, it's violent, and if it's done right, it's silent. But even a blitz attack leaves evidence. A shoe, a Walkman knocked to the ground, tire marks, something. Unless the attacker was incredibly lucky or incredibly skilled, there was one lead that investigators focused on: a white Camaro or Trans Am style vehicle. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a car like this cruising through the neighborhood around the time of Rachel's disappearance, driving slowly, circling back, the kind of behavior that makes you think surveillance, but they never got a license plate. They never identified the driver. And here's the frustrating part: a white Camaro isn't exactly rare in Texas. Without more information, it was just a ghost lead, a shadow of a possibility. Let's talk about the yellow Walkman for a second, because it's important. Rachel was wearing headphones. She was listening to music. That means her situational awareness was compromised. She couldn't hear a car approaching from behind. She couldn't hear footsteps. The wind was blowing 14, 15 miles per hour, rustling through the trees, masking sounds even further. If you were planning to abduct someone, you'd look for exactly this scenario. A runner, alone, headphones on, predictable route. She's in her own world. You pull up alongside her, and by the time she realizes what's happening, it's too late. The Walkman also tells us something else. It was never found. If Rachel had been attacked and managed to fight back, that Walkman would have gone flying. It was bright yellow. You couldn't miss it, but it was never recovered. That suggests she was controlled immediately, grabbed, restrained, and removed so quickly that she didn't have time to drop anything. And then there's the unlocked door. This detail haunts me. Rachel always locked the door, always. Her family confirmed this. It was a habit, a reflex. So why was it unlocked when her father came home? Theory 1, she forgot, but that doesn't fit her personality. She was careful. Theory 2, she came back to the house, unlocked the door, and was taken from the driveway or the front yard. But neighbors didn't see her return. And if she'd made it back to the house, why didn't she go inside? Theory 3, someone was waiting for her. Someone who had access to the house or who convinced her to unlock the door. None of these theories have enough evidence to stand on their own. They're just possibilities floating in the void. Over the years, there have been dozens of false leads, inmates confessing to crimes they didn't commit, trying to trade information for better treatment, psychics claiming they know where Rachel is buried, anonymous tips that lead nowhere. In 2017, there was a significant development. Police announced they'd found blood in a vehicle that was potentially linked to Rachel's disappearance. The media exploded. Families had hope, but then silence. No follow-up, no arrest. The lead went cold, just like all the others. Rachel's case became a textbook example of what's sometimes called missing white woman syndrome, the media's tendency to focus heavily on disappearances of young, attractive white women from middle-class families. Rachel's face was everywhere. On the news, on Disappeared, on missing persons websites, age progression photos showing what she might look like at 25, at 30, at 35. But despite all the attention, despite all the searches, despite all the publicity, Rachel Cook has never been found. No body, no clothing, no yellow Walkman. Georgetown, Texas is still a safe town. The North Lake subdivision is still a nice neighborhood. People still go for morning runs. But if you talk to the locals, they'll tell you they think about Rachel sometimes. They think about how she was right there, so close to home, and then she just wasn't. The terror of this case isn't just that Rachel disappeared, it's that she disappeared in daylight, in safety, in plain sight. She wasn't walking alone on a dark road at midnight. She wasn't in a dangerous part of town. She was running through her own neighborhood on a beautiful winter morning, wearing a bright yellow Walkman, visible to anyone who cared to look. And someone did look. Someone saw her running. Someone saw her headphones on, her attention divided. Someone saw the opportunity. And in the time it takes to blink, in the space of 200 yards, 2 football fields, 30 seconds, they took her. Rachel Cook was running home. She could probably see her driveway. She was thinking about what she'd do the rest of the day, what she'd eat for lunch, maybe what she'd watch on TV. And then she was gone. 23 years later, her family is still waiting for her to finish that run, still waiting for her to walk through the unlocked door. But the door stays open, and Rachel never comes home. April 26, 2010. Spring, Texas. If you've ever been to Spring, you know it's suburbia in its purest form. Strip malls, chain restaurants, neighborhoods with names like Cypress Creek and Willow Bend. It's the kind of place where everyone knows the good taco spot and the Friday night football games matter. Safe, predictable, boring in the best possible way. On April 26, 2010, it was a typical Monday afternoon. The temperature had climbed to 87 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot, but not unbearable. The humidity was thick. This is Texas after all, hovering around 69%, the kind of sticky heat that makes you want to crank the AC and grab a cold drink. School buses were making their rounds. Kids were flooding out, backpacks slung over shoulders, talking about homework and weekend plans. It was loud, it was chaotic, it was normal. And somewhere in that normalcy, a 16-year-old girl named Ali Lowitzer walked into thin air. Let me tell you about Ali. Alexandria Joy Lowitzer, everyone called her Ali, was a sophomore at Spring High School. She was artistic, loved to read, sent thousands of text messages a month like any teenager in 2010. She had a job at a local burger joint called The Burger Barn. Not glamorous work, but it was hers. She was responsible, showed up on time, picked up shifts when she could. On this particular Monday, Ali had a plan. It was simple, straightforward. The kind of plan that shouldn't result in anything more dramatic than a paycheck and maybe some French fries. She was going to walk to the Burger Barn, pick up her check, and maybe see if they needed her for a shift. That's it. That was the plan. At around 2:45 p.m., Ali got on the school bus like she did every day. She was wearing a white t-shirt, a gray zip-up hoodie, black skinny jeans, and checkered slip-on Vans. She had her backpack with her, multicolored, checkered pattern. She had her phone, a blue LG slide phone, the kind with the little keyboard that flipped out. The bus dropped her off at the intersection of Knotty Post Drive and Low Ridge Road, right near her house. 2 boys from her school got off with her. They saw her standing there, adjusting her backpack. And then they saw her turn, not toward her house, away from it, toward the main road, toward Treshwig Road. She was heading to the Burger Barn. At 2:57 p.m., Ali sent a text to her mother, Joanne. "I'm going to the Burger Barn to pick up my paycheck." She also asked about the house key, whether she needed to grab it before she left. Normal teenager stuff, logistical, mundane. That text message was the last communication Ali Lowitzer ever sent. Now, here's where you need to understand the geography of this because it's critical. The Burger Barn was not far away. It wasn't across town. It wasn't some distant location that required a car or a long walk. It was a quarter of a mile from where the bus dropped her off. A quarter mile, 0.25 miles, 320 feet. In normal walking conditions, that's a 5 to 7 minute walk. Maybe 10 minutes if you're strolling slowly in 87-degree heat. It was a straight shot down Treshwig Road. A paved suburban road, not a dark alley, not a deserted highway. A normal street in a normal neighborhood on a normal Monday afternoon. Ali Lowitzer started walking. She was seen turning onto the main road, and then she vanished. She never arrived at the Burger Barn. The surveillance cameras at the restaurant, yes, they checked, never captured her walking in. She never picked up her paycheck. She never clocked in for a shift. Her phone, which she'd been using constantly, thousands of texts a month, remember, went dark. The blue LG slide phone was never used again. No calls, no texts, no pings off cell towers. It was as if someone had reached down, plucked her off the sidewalk, and erased her from existence. When Ali didn't come home that night, her family panicked. They called the police. They filed a missing persons report, and here's where the system failed her. The police labeled Ali a runaway. Now let's stop right here and talk about this because it's infuriating. Ali Lowitzer did not fit the profile of a runaway at all. Let me walk you through the evidence. First, her room. When her family searched her room, it was messy. Normal teenager messy. Clothes everywhere, makeup on the dresser, chargers plugged in. You know what wasn't missing? Her stuff. Her favorite clothes were still there. Her money, what little she had, was still there. Runaways pack bags. They take their clothes, their chargers, their cash. They plan, they prepare. Ali left everything behind. Second, she was walking to get her paycheck. Think about that. If you're planning to run away, you need money. You need resources. Ali was literally going to collect money, her paycheck from the burger barn, and she never picked it up. Runaways don't walk away from money. They need it. Third, she'd sent a text to her mom. She'd told her exactly where she was going. If you're running away, you don't send a courtesy text with your location and your plan. You just go. But because Ali was a teenager, because she had a phone and a life and maybe some teenage drama in her background, the police put her in the runaway category. And that label has consequences. It means resources aren't deployed immediately. It means there's no Amber Alert. It means the critical first 24 to 48 hours, the window when most abducted people are found alive, are wasted. By the time the police started treating this as an abduction, the trail was ice cold. So what happened on that quarter-mile walk? The most logical theory, and the most terrifying, is that Ali got into a car, either willingly or by force. But here's the thing. Why would she get into a car for a 5-minute walk? She knew the area. She'd walked to the burger barn before. It wasn't far. It wasn't dangerous. There's no logical reason for a 16-year-old girl to accept a ride for a distance she could walk faster than you could drive, especially in a residential area with stop signs and traffic. Unless she knew the person driving. Or unless she didn't have a choice. A blitz-style abduction. A van pulls up, door slides open, someone grabs her and pulls her inside before she can scream. It's fast. It's violent. And if it's done in the span of seconds, witnesses might not even register what they're seeing. But this was 3 p.m. on a Monday afternoon. Treshwig Road isn't a deserted country lane. It's a busy suburban street. Cars pass constantly. People are outside. How do you abduct someone in broad daylight without anyone noticing? The answer is, you're very good at it. Or very lucky, or both. There's another theory that investigators have pursued, and it's darker. Human trafficking. Spring, Texas, sits in a region that has a well-documented problem with trafficking. The proximity to Houston, a major city with interstate highways radiating in every direction, makes it a hub. Young girls, especially those who might be initially misclassified as runaways, are vulnerable targets. Ali fit the profile that traffickers look for. Young, isolated, walking alone, predictable routine. Was she spotted? Was she targeted? Was someone watching her, knowing her schedule, knowing she walked to work? The speed of her disappearance suggests planning. This wasn't a crime of opportunity where someone randomly grabbed the first person they saw. This was precise. She was taken in a narrow window of time on a specific stretch of road without leaving a trace. That feels like an extraction. Over the years, there have been tips, sightings, rumors of trafficking rings operating in the area. Private investigators were hired, age progression photos were created, but nothing has led to Ali. Her blue LG slide phone never powered on again. That tells us something. Whoever took her knew about phones, knew about tracking. The phone was either destroyed immediately or the battery was pulled. This wasn't an amateur. Ali's family never gave up. They've kept her case in the public eye. They've pushed for more resources, more attention, more pressure on law enforcement. But the frustrating reality is that when a case is misclassified at the start, when critical hours are lost because of a label, it's almost impossible to recover. Ali Lowitzer was 16 years old. She was walking to pick up a paycheck. She was wearing a gray hoodie in 87-degree heat, because that's what teenagers do. She had her checkered backpack and her blue phone and her whole life ahead of her. She sent a text to her mom at 2:57 p.m., and by 3:05 p.m., maybe 3:10 at the latest, she was gone. A quarter of a mile, 5 to 7 minutes. That's all it took for someone to erase her. No backpack was ever found, no phone, no checkered Vans, no gray hoodie. The Burger Barn is still there, by the way. Same location, same building. If you drive past it on Treshwig Road, you can measure the distance from where the bus dropped Allie off. You can time yourself. You can see how short the walk really is, and you can imagine a 16-year-old girl, headphones maybe in her ears, thinking about her paycheck, thinking about whether she'd have to work that evening, thinking about normal teenage things. And then, a car pulls up, and in the span of a breath, in the time it takes you to look away and look back, she's gone. Allie Lowitzer walked off the school bus and into the void. She sent a text, took a few steps, and disappeared from the face of the earth. 14 years later, her family is still waiting for her to come home, still waiting for that quarter-mile walk to end. But the Burger Barn stays open. And Ollie never arrives. December 20th, 2021, San Antonio, Texas. Before we talk about what happened on that December afternoon, we need to talk about how the Kill family got to San Antonio in the first place. Because the irony of this case, the tragic, gut-wrenching irony, is that they came to America to be safe. The Kill family are Afghan refugees. They fled Afghanistan in 2019, escaping the Taliban, escaping war, escaping a country where their daughter's future would have been dictated by violence and oppression. They made it through the refugee process, interviews, background checks, the endless waiting, and they were resettled in the United States. San Antonio, Texas, became their home. The Villas del Cabo apartment complex on Fredericksburg Road became their community. It was a hub for refugee families, Afghans, Syrians, people from all over the world who'd escaped unimaginable circumstances to find safety in America, the superpower, the land of opportunity, the place where their children could grow up without fear. And for a while, it worked. Riaz Sardar Kill and his wife Zarmina were building a life. Their daughter Lena was thriving. She was 3 years old, 4 feet tall, 55 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes, a toddler with her whole life ahead of her. On December 20th, 2021, it was a mild winter evening in San Antonio. The temperature was in the 70s during the day, dropping into the 60s as the afternoon wore on. It was overcast, a little damp. The region had seen some light drizzle in the days before. But it was pleasant, comfortable, the kind of weather where you'd take your kids to the playground. Lena was wearing a red dress that day. A black jacket over it, black shoes. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She was excited to play. At around 4 p.m., Lena's mother took her to the playground at the Villas del Cabo complex. This wasn't some isolated park in the woods. This was a fenced playground in the middle of an apartment complex. Families lived all around it. Windows overlooked it. It was contained, safe. Other children were there, other parents. It was a community space, and on a Monday afternoon, it was doing exactly what it was designed to do, giving kids a place to burn off energy while their parents watched. Lena ran around. She played on the swings, maybe the slide. She was doing what 3-year-olds do, laughing, moving, being a kid, and her mother was right there. Now, here's where we need to talk about the timeline. Because it's been analyzed down to the minute. The FBI, specifically Agent Justin Garris, who would later become the face of this investigation, identified a precise 18-minute window from 4:49 p.m. to 5:07 p.m., 18 minutes. At 4:49 p.m., Lena was last seen by her mother and other adults at the playground. She was there, visible, playing. At some point in the next 18 minutes, Lena's mother looked away. Maybe she was watching another child. Maybe she glanced at her phone. Maybe she turned to talk to another parent. We don't know the exact reason, and honestly, it doesn't matter. Because every parent has done this. Every parent has looked away for a moment. It's not negligence. It's not bad parenting. It's being human. But when Lena's mother looked back, Lena was gone. At 5:07 p.m., the mother realized Lena wasn't on the playground anymore. She searched. She called Lena's name. She checked the swings, the slide, the little hiding spots kids love. She walked around the perimeter of the fence. She checked the gate. Nothing. She ran to the parking lot. Maybe Lena had wandered toward the cars. Maybe she'd gotten confused and was looking for their apartment. Nothing. Other families joined the search. Neighbors started combing the complex. They checked between buildings, behind dumpsters, in stairwells. They looked everywhere a curious 3-year-old might wander. Nothing. By 7:15 p.m., more than 2 hours later, the family called the police. Now, that 2-hour delay needs context. The Kill family spoke limited English. They were refugees in a foreign country, and their instinct was to handle it within their community first. To search themselves, to ask neighbors for help before involving authorities. It's not suspicious, it's cultural. It's the reality of being an immigrant family in a country where you're still learning how the systems work. But those 2 hours mattered. Because by the time the police arrived, by the time the Amber Alert was issued, by the time the FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team was activated, Lena had been gone for over 2 hours. And in an abduction case, those first 2 hours are everything. Let's talk about the playground itself, because the logistics of this disappearance are baffling. The playground was fenced, not a massive prison-style fence, but enough to create a boundary. There was a gate, an opening, but it was visible. If a 3-year-old walked out of that gate alone, someone would have noticed. A toddler in a red dress wandering by herself? That's the kind of thing that makes people stop and look. And yet, no one saw her leave. No one saw a struggle. No one heard a scream. No one saw a strange car pull up or a suspicious person lingering near the playground. So how does a 3-year-old vanish from a fenced area surrounded by families in 18 minutes without a single witness? Here's what we know didn't happen. Lena didn't wander off and get lost in the complex. The FBI brought in search dogs. They deployed drones. They searched every inch of the Villas del Cabo property. They checked dumpsters multiple times. They searched the greenbelt areas nearby, the drainage ditches, the creek. If Lena had wandered away and gotten stuck somewhere, or fallen, or hidden in a place where she couldn't get out, they would have found her. They didn't. That tells us something critical. Lena was removed from the complex, quickly, efficiently, within that 18-minute window. Now, let's talk about the physics of abducting a 3-year-old. 3-year-olds are loud. They cry when they're scared. They scream when a stranger grabs them. They kick and flail and make noise. It's instinct. But here, silence. No one heard a child crying. No one heard a scream. No one saw a person carrying a struggling toddler. That implies one of two things. Option 1, Lena knew the person who took her. She went with them willingly. Maybe they said, "Come with me, I'll take you to your mom." Maybe they offered candy or a toy. She trusted them enough not to scream. Option 2, the abduction was so fast and so controlled that Lena didn't have time to make noise. A hand over the mouth. Into a vehicle in seconds, professional, planned. Both possibilities are terrifying. The FBI treated this as a stranger abduction from the start. They deployed their Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team, a specialized unit that only gets called for the most serious cases. They set up a command center. They interviewed everyone in the complex. They pulled surveillance footage from nearby businesses, and they found almost nothing. There was one piece of footage, a resident security camera, that captured Lena at the playground before she disappeared. It confirmed she was wearing the red dress. It confirmed she was there. But it didn't capture the moment she vanished. The FBI offered a reward, initially $50,000, then it climbed higher. Tips came in, leads were followed. An inmate claimed to know where Lena was buried and directed investigators to a wooded area near Interstate 10. They searched, they dug, they found nothing. The tip was a dead end, a lie from someone looking for attention or a reduced sentence. Lena's father, Riaz Sardar Kill, took a polygraph test. He passed. The family cooperated fully with investigators. There was no indication of family involvement, no history of abuse, no reason to suspect the parents. This was a stranger abduction, a child plucked from a playground in the middle of a residential complex in broad daylight. And 3 years later, there's been no trace of her. Let me give you a sense of how thorough the search was. The FBI didn't just search the complex once, they came back multiple times. They used cadaver dogs. They used ground-penetrating radar. They checked every dumpster in the area, because in cases like this, you have to consider the worst possibilities. If Lena had been killed and dumped nearby, they would have found her. They didn't. That means she was moved, taken out of the area. transported somewhere beyond the immediate search radius. But where? And by whom? The cruel reality is that 3-year-olds don't survive long on their own. If Lena had wandered into the woods or fallen into a body of water, her remains would have been found by now. Texas doesn't hide bodies well. The terrain, the scavengers, the weather, all work against long-term concealment. So if she's not in the search area, and she's not lost in the wilderness, then someone has her. Or had her. And that opens up the darkest possibilities. Human trafficking. Abduction by someone who wanted a child. Black market adoption. San Antonio sits on Interstate 35, a major trafficking corridor. It's a known problem. Children, especially young children who can't identify their abductors, who can't tell authorities their real names, are valuable in the worst possible way. The Kill family came to America to escape danger. They fled a country torn apart by war. They survived the chaos of the Afghan evacuation. They made it to Texas, to a quiet apartment complex with a playground and neighbors and a community. And then, in 18 minutes, their daughter was taken. Think about that. You survive the Taliban. You survive the collapse of a government. You make it to the other side of the world, to the place that's supposed to be safe, and your daughter disappears from a playground. The irony is unbearable. Lena would be 6 years old now. If she's alive, she might not even remember her parents. She might not remember her name. She might have been told a different story about who she is and where she came from. Or she might be gone entirely. The FBI hasn't closed the case. The reward is still active. Lena's face is still on missing children websites. Age progressed to show what she might look like now. But the leads have dried up. The tips have stopped coming. The media moved on to the next tragedy. And a family that came to America for safety is left with a question that has no answer. Where is our daughter? The playground at Vilas del Cabo is still there. Kids still play on the swings. Families still gather on warm afternoons. But if you ask the families in that complex, they'll tell you they watch their children a little more closely now. They don't look away as often. They count heads obsessively because they know what can happen in 18 minutes. Lena Sardar Kill was wearing a red dress. She was playing on a fenced playground surrounded by people. She was 3 years old. And then she was gone. August 2nd, 2006, Longview, Texas. Let me set the scene for you because the atmosphere matters here. Longview is in East Texas, deep in the piney woods. It's oil country, timber country, the kind of place where the humidity sits on you like a wet blanket in the summer. On August 2nd, 2006, the temperature peaked at 97 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. By evening, it had only dropped to the mid-70s. The dew point was sitting at nearly 73 degrees, which means the air was thick, heavy, oppressive. It was a Wednesday night, but at Graham Central Station, a popular nightclub in Longview, it was college night. The place was packed, music thumping, drinks flowing, people dancing. The energy was loud and chaotic in that way that nightclubs are. Strobe lights, bass you can feel in your chest, crowds of people pressed together. Brandy Ellen Wells decided to go. Brandy was 23 years old. She was bright, outgoing, independent. She worked, she had friends, she lived her life. That Wednesday, she'd originally planned to go to a pawn shop, but she changed her mind and headed to Graham Central Station instead. She arrived around 10:30 p.m., driving her black 2000 Pontiac Grand Prix. Now, here's a detail that matters. Brandy wasn't familiar with the club. She'd called the venue multiple times earlier in the evening, asking for directions. She was navigating to a place she didn't know well, which means she was already slightly out of her comfort zone. But she made it. She parked in the upper-level parking lot and went inside. Witnesses inside the club saw her. She was there. She was socializing. She seemed to be having a good time. But as the night wore on, something changed. Later in the evening, witnesses reported that Brandy seemed distressed. She was asking people for help. Specifically, she was asking for gas money or assistance getting gas. Her car was running on fumes and she needed help. Think about that for a second. You're at a nightclub, surrounded by strangers, and you realize your car is about to run out of gas. It's a vulnerable position. You're asking people you don't know to help you with a problem that makes you dependent on their goodness. It's the kind of situation predators look for. Shortly after midnight, early morning on August 3rd, Brandy left the club. Surveillance footage shows her walking out the front doors. She's alone. She's not stumbling. She's not visibly intoxicated. She walks toward the parking lot, toward her car, and then she disappears. When Brandy didn't come home, her family started to worry, but it wasn't immediate panic. She was an adult after all. Maybe she'd stayed with a friend. Maybe her phone had died. But as hours turned into days, the worry turned into fear. 5 days later, on August 7th, Brandy's car was found. It was on the westbound side of Interstate 20, near the intersection with Texas Highway 31, just outside Longview. About 300 yards west of FM 2087, it was pulled over on the shoulder, stationary, silent. When investigators approached the vehicle, they immediately noticed something, a smell, the smell of decomposition. For a brief, horrible moment, they thought they'd found Brandy's body. They opened the trunk. It wasn't a body. It was rotting fast food. Old bags of burgers and fries that had been baking in the Texas heat for 5 days. The smell was overwhelming, but it wasn't human remains. Brandy wasn't in the car. She wasn't in the trunk. She was just gone. But the car itself told a story, and that story doesn't make sense. Let's inventory what was found in the Pontiac Grand Prix, because every detail matters. First, the doors were unlocked, not forced open, not broken, just unlocked. Inside the car, they found Brandy's purse. Her wallet was in the purse, money, ID, everything still there. This immediately rules out robbery as a motive. If someone wanted to steal from her, they would have taken the purse, but it was sitting right there, untouched. They also found an old cell phone, a non-functional phone that belonged to an ex-boyfriend. Just clutter. A sentimental object maybe, or something she'd forgotten to throw away. But Brandy's cell phone, the one she'd been using, was missing from the car. Now, here's where it gets strange. In the trunk, they found a plastic gas can. It didn't belong to Brandy. No one in her family recognized it. It was foreign to the vehicle. The theory that investigators developed went like this. Brandy left the club, ran out of gas on Interstate 20, and someone, a good Samaritan, stopped to help her. They gave her a gas can, maybe offered to give her a ride to a gas station. And somewhere in that interaction, something went wrong. But let's actually think about that theory for a second, because it has holes you could drive a truck through. If you run out of gas on a major highway, what do? You pull over, you lock your car, you call someone, AAA, a friend, family. You don't leave your car unlocked with your purse and wallet sitting on the seat. And if a stranger offers you help, you're cautious, you're defensive, especially if you're a woman alone at night on a dark highway. You don't just vanish. But here's the part that really doesn't add up. The driver's seat. When investigators examined the car, they noticed the driver's seat was pushed all the way back, significantly farther back than it would need to be for Brandy, who was of average height for a woman. Someone taller had driven that car. Someone else had been behind the wheel when the Pontiac was abandoned on Interstate 20. That's not a theory. That's a physical fact. The seat position doesn't lie. So if Brandy didn't drive the car to that spot, who did? Now let's talk about the phone, because this is where the case gets truly disturbing. Brandy's cell phone wasn't in the car, but it wasn't lost forever. After her disappearance, the phone showed activity. It was eventually found in the possession of 3 men. One of those men failed a polygraph test when asked about how he came to have the phone. Let me say that again. A man who had Brandy's phone, the phone she had on her the night she disappeared, failed a polygraph when asked about it. Polygraphs aren't perfect. They're not admissible in all courts. But in an investigative context, a failed polygraph about a missing person's phone is a massive red flag. It means deception. It means that person knows more than they're saying. But here's the frustrating reality. The investigation stalled. The phone was found. The men were questioned. But no arrest was ever made. No concrete evidence tied them to Brandy's disappearance. Just the phone. Just the failed polygraph. Just the lingering unanswered questions. So let's piece together what we think happened. Brandy left Graham Central Station around midnight. Her car was low on gas. She either made it to Interstate 20 before running out, or she headed that direction hoping to find a gas station. At some point, someone approached her. Maybe they offered to help. Maybe they forced their way into the situation. But however it happened, control of Brandy's car was transferred to another person. That person, statistically likely to be male given the seat position, drove the Pontiac to the spot on I-20 where it was found. They left the purse, the wallet, everything that would identify the car as Brandy's, but they took Brandy. And her phone? Her phone ended up hundreds of yards away from the car in a grassy area. People don't drop their phones while walking for gas. You keep your phone in your hand. It's your lifeline. It's your flashlight. It's your connection to help. But a thrown phone? That's different. A thrown phone suggests a struggle. It suggests someone trying to leave a clue, a trail. It suggests Brandy knew she was in trouble and tried to make sure someone could track where she'd been. Or it suggests the person who took her threw the phone to disable the one thing that could lead investigators to him. Either way, the phone being separated from the car is not an accident. The clothing Brandy was wearing that night has never been found. She was last seen in a dark-colored floral print tube top that V'd down over the hips, rust-colored gaucho-style pants, and strapless high-heel sandals with floral applique. Those are specific items. Distinctive. If they'd been discarded on the side of the road or found in a field, someone would have noticed. But they've never turned up. Neither has Brandy. Interstate 20 is a major artery through East Texas. It connects Longview to Dallas to Shreveport to the rest of the country. If you wanted to move someone quickly to get them out of the area before anyone noticed they were missing, I-20 is the road you'd use. The fact that the car was found there, abandoned, unlocked with the seat pushed back, suggests the person who took Brandy had their own vehicle. They drove her car to that spot, left it, and drove away in a second vehicle. That level of planning, that level of control, suggests this wasn't a random act. This was someone who knew what they were doing. The heat that night was oppressive. Even at midnight, the temperature was still in the mid-70s with crushing humidity. If Brandy had been left somewhere in the elements, exposure would have been a factor. But despite extensive searches of the area around I-20, no body was ever found. Which means she was moved, taken somewhere beyond the search radius, hidden. Brandy Wells walked out of Graham Central Station shortly after midnight on August 3, 2006. She was alive. She was alone. She was heading to her car. And somewhere between the parking lot and Interstate 20, she vanished. Her car was found. Her purse was found. A gas can that didn't belong to her was found. But Brandy? Brandy is still missing. 18 years later, her family is still searching, still hoping, still asking the same questions investigators have been asking since 2006. Who helped her with gas? Who drove her car? Who has her phone? And where is Brandy Wells? The Pontiac Grand Prix was eventually released from evidence. The nightclub closed years ago. Interstate 20 is still there, cars rushing past the spot where her car sat silent and empty. But the answers? The answers are still out there, somewhere in the East Texas night, buried in the silence that swallowed Brandy whole. July 7, 2006. Austin, Texas. When people think of Austin, they usually picture the trendy parts: 6th Street with its live music and neon signs, South Congress with its vintage shops and food trucks, the weird, quirky Austin that shows up on postcasts and travel blogs. But that's not the Austin we're talking about today. We're talking about the stretch of Interstate 35 near Runberg Lane. If you know this area, you know it's a different world. Strip clubs, cheap motels, pawn shops. The kind of place where the neon signs flicker and half of them are burned out, where the parking lots are cracked asphalt and broken glass, where people don't ask questions because they don't want to know the answers. On July 7, 2006, the temperature in Austin climbed into the mid-90s. The air was thick with humidity and haze. Weather reports from that day specifically mention haze and mist hanging over the city. By evening, as the sun set around 8:36 p.m., the heat was still oppressive, the kind of sticky, suffocating heat that makes you want to stay inside with the AC cranking. The Budget Inn sits right on this stretch of I-35. It's a 2-story motel, the kind with exterior doors that open directly to the parking lot, the kind where you pay by the week if you're down on your luck or by the night if you're just passing through. The sound of highway traffic is constant, 18-wheelers rumbling past, cars rushing toward Dallas or San Antonio, the white noise of people going somewhere else. Room 119 was on the first floor. That's where Roxanne Elizabeth Paltoff was staying with her boyfriend, Lewis Walls. Roxanne was 18 years old, legally an adult, but still very much a kid in a lot of ways. She was thin. People who knew her described her as the pencil, a nickname that suggested how slight she was. She had her whole life ahead of her, but at that moment, she was living in a budget-inn motel room with a man who was older than her, in a relationship that friends later described as volatile. On the evening of July 7th, according to Lewis Walls, things went wrong. Here's the story he told police. Around 8:30 p.m., he and Roxanne got into an argument. He claimed it was heated. He claimed she got angry and stormed out of the room to cool off. She left without saying where she was going. He said he waited for about 20 minutes, then went out to look for her. He couldn't find her. He claims he came back to the room and waited. She didn't come back that night. The next morning, July 8th, Louis Walls checked out of the budget inn. He gathered up Roxanne's belongings, her clothes, her personal items, and took them to his sister's house. And then, eventually, he reported her missing. Now, let's stop right here and talk about what's wrong with this story, because there are holes in this narrative big enough to drive a truck through. First, let's talk about what Roxanne allegedly left behind. According to Louis, when Roxanne stormed out of the room, she took only her Texas ID card. That's it. One piece of identification. She left her cell phone, she left her purse, she left her wallet with whatever money she had, she left her clothes, and here's the detail that should make every alarm bell in your head start ringing. She left without shoes. Let me say that again. Roxanne Paltoff allegedly walked out of a motel room in a sketchy part of Austin in the middle of summer without shoes. Think about that. It's July in Texas. The asphalt in that parking lot would have been scorching hot from baking in the sun all day. Even at 8:30 p.m., the pavement retains heat. Walking barefoot on that surface would be painful. And we're not even talking about the broken glass, the gravel, the rough concrete. This isn't a beach. This isn't a grassy park. This is a budget inn parking lot on I-35. For an 18-year-old girl to walk out barefoot suggests one of two things. Either she was in such a state of panic that she literally fled without thinking, or she never left voluntarily at all. But Lewis's story says she was just angry, just cooling off. If you're mad at your boyfriend and you need air, you grab your phone. You grab your shoes, you grab your cigarettes or your keys or whatever. You don't walk out into a dangerous neighborhood barefoot and phoneless like you're sleepwalking. It doesn't make sense. Now let's talk about the timeline of Louis's actions, because this is where his story completely falls apart. He claims Roxanne left around 8:30 p.m. He says he went looking for her around 8:50 p.m., 20 minutes later, couldn't find her. Okay, let's say that's true. Your 18-year-old girlfriend walks out into one of the roughest parts of Austin without shoes or a phone, and you can't find her after 20 minutes. What do? You call the police, immediately. You call her family, you call her friends, you go back out and search again. You knock on doors, you ask other motel guests if they've seen her, you panic. What you don't do is go back to the room, go to sleep, and wait until the next morning. But that's exactly what Lewis Walls claims he did. And it gets worse. The next morning, Louis didn't just sit around waiting for Roxanne to come back. He checked out of the motel. He packed up all of her belongings, her clothes, her toiletries, everything, and he took them to his sister's house. Think about what that means. He removed every trace of Roxanne from the room. He eliminated the crime scene. If Roxanne had been attacked in that room, if there had been blood or signs of a struggle, the motel housekeeping would have cleaned it up by the time police were called. And even if they hadn't, Louis had already removed Roxanne's belongings, contaminating any potential evidence. Whether intentional or not, his actions made it nearly impossible to investigate what actually happened in room 119. Now, let's talk about the phone, because this detail is absolutely chilling. Roxanne's cell phone was left in the room. Louis had it. Between July 8th and July 12th, the days immediately following Roxanne's disappearance, that phone made over 300 outgoing calls. 300 calls. Who was making those calls? Louis Walls. And who was he calling? Not the police, not Roxanne's family, not her friends to ask if they'd seen her. He was calling his ex-girlfriend in New Mexico. Let me make sure that lands. While his current girlfriend was missing, while an 18-year-old girl he claimed to care about was supposedly wandering around Austin barefoot and alone, Louis Walls was using her phone to call his ex-girlfriend hundreds of times. That's not the behavior of someone worried about a missing loved one. That's the behavior of someone who's already moved on, someone who knows she's not coming back. But it gets even stranger. 6 days after Roxanne disappeared, on July 13th, her Texas ID card was found. Remember, that's the one thing Louis claimed she took with her. It was found in the wallet of a man named Jeffrey Moore. Jeffrey Moore wasn't just some random guy. He was a suspect in a violent crime. Specifically, he'd been accused of attacking and attempting to rape an exotic dancer at a Motel 6 nearby, the same general area as the Budget Inn. So how did Moore get Roxanne's ID? There are a few possibilities. Theory 1, Louis gave or sold the ID to Moore. Maybe there was some kind of transaction or connection between them. Theory 2, Roxanne actually did leave the room that night, and she was immediately intercepted by Moore in the parking lot or on the street. She escaped one danger and ran straight into another. Theory 3, Moore found the ID near where Roxanne's body or belongings were dumped. None of these theories are good. All of them point to foul play. But here's the frustrating reality. Jeffrey Moore was never charged in connection with Roxanne's disappearance. The link was investigated, but nothing concrete ever came of it. He remained a shadow in this case, a name, a lead, a question mark. There's another disturbing detail that often gets overlooked. When Louis finally returned Roxanne's belongings to her family, they noticed something strange. The bag of clothing he gave them contained items that were too large for Roxanne. Roxanne was tiny. The pencil, remember? But some of the clothes in the bag didn't fit that description. They were too big. They belonged to someone else. Was Louis in such a hurry to create a decoy bag that he grabbed random women's clothing? Did he have clothing from multiple women? Or was this just a mistake? It's another piece of the puzzle that doesn't fit. Let's talk about the setting one more time, because the location matters. The Budget Inn on I-35 near Runberg Lane is not a safe place. It's a high-crime area. It's known for prostitution, drug deals, transient populations. The motel itself is the kind of place where you don't ask questions about the people in the next room. If something happened to Roxanne in or near that motel, there were probably people who saw something. But in an area like that, witnesses don't come forward. People mind their business, they don't want to get involved. And if Roxanne was taken from that location, I-35 offers a straight shot north to Dallas or south to San Antonio. Within an hour, you could be in a completely different jurisdiction. Within 2 hours, you could cross state lines. The highway is a tool for people who want to disappear someone. Roxanne Paltov has been missing for over 18 years. Her case remains open, but there have been no major breaks. No body has been found. No arrests have been made. Louis Walls has never been charged with a crime. He remains a person of interest, but without physical evidence, without a body, there's no case to prosecute. Jeffrey Moore's connection to the ID remains unexplained. And Roxanne is gone. Her family has had to live with the not knowing, the wondering. The haunting possibility that she's out there somewhere, or that she's been gone since that July night in 2006. The last confirmed sighting of Roxanne Paltov was in room 119 of the Budget Inn. Louis Walls says she walked out at 8:30 p.m., angry and barefoot, into the Austin night. But did she? Or did something happen in that room? Something violent, something final, and the story of the argument and the walk was just a cover. The motel has probably been renovated since then. Room 119 has been cleaned, repainted, rented to 100 different people. Whatever secrets that room held have been scrubbed away. But the questions remain. Why would an 18-year-old girl leave without shoes? Why would she leave her phone, her lifeline, behind? Why would her boyfriend wait until the next day to report her missing? Why would he pack up her belongings and remove them from the scene? And how did her ID end up in the wallet of a violent predator? Roxanne Paltoff walked out of room 119. Or maybe she didn't walk out at all. Either way, she never came back. And somewhere along Interstate 35, in the flickering neon lights and the roar of highway traffic, the truth is still hiding. October 6th, 2024, Olmos Park, Texas. Let me tell you about Olmos Park because understanding this place is essential to understanding this case. Olmos Park is not just a neighborhood in San Antonio, it's an incorporated city, a tiny, exclusive enclave of wealth surrounded by the larger metro area. We're talking about massive estates, manicured lawns, tree-lined streets where the houses start at $1 million and go up from there. It's gated driveways, luxury cars, private clubs. It's the kind of place where violent crime doesn't happen, where neighbors know each other but mind their own business, where image is everything. On the evening of October 6, 2024, the weather in San Antonio was pleasant. The high had been 87 degrees, but by evening it had cooled to the upper 60s. The moon was a waning crescent, only about 15% illuminated, which meant once it set around 9:22 p.m., the night would be dark, really dark. That evening, Brad and Suzanne Simpson attended an event at the Argyle, an exclusive private club in Olmos Park. This is the kind of place where memberships cost more than most people make in a year, where charity galas happen, where the wealthy of San Antonio gather to network and socialize over champagne and catered hors d'oeuvres. Suzanne Simpson fit perfectly into this world. She was a successful realtor, connected, well-liked. She was a mother of 4. She had the kind of life that looks perfect from the outside. The big house, the successful husband, the beautiful family. But that night at the Argyle, the facade started to crack. Witnesses at the club reported seeing Brad and Suzanne arguing. It wasn't a quiet disagreement. It was public. It was messy. The kind of argument that makes other people uncomfortable, that makes them look away and pretend they didn't see anything. But they did see, and they remembered. At some point during the evening, around 9:15 p.m., Suzanne called her mother, and what she said was chilling. Brad assaulted me. Those were her words, not we had a fight, not he got angry. She used the word assaulted. It was a cry for help, an outcry to a trusted family member that something was very wrong. And then, at 9:16 p.m., 1 minute after that call to her mother, something happened to Suzanne's phone. The service was suspended, not turned off by accident, not dead battery, suspended through the AT&T app, and phone records later showed that Brad Simpson accessed that app at exactly 9:16 p.m. Think about what that means. In the span of 60 seconds, Suzanne tells her mother she's been assaulted and her phone service is cut off. Her lifeline to the outside world is severed, deliberately. That's not a coincidence, that's control, that's isolation. The couple left the Argyle and drove home to their residence in Olmos Park. What happened next was witnessed by a neighbor, and the testimony is harrowing. Between 10:00 p.m. and 11:00 p.m., a neighbor saw a physical struggle in the Simpsons' front yard, not inside the house where it might have been hidden, outside, in the open. The neighbor watched as Suzanne tried to get away. She was moving toward the street trying to flee, and Brad grabbed her. He grabbed her around the torso and physically pulled her back, dragged her back toward the house. The neighbor didn't intervene, didn't call the police. This is the dark reality of wealthy neighborhoods. People don't want to get involved. They assume it's a domestic dispute that will resolve itself. They don't want the scandal. But it didn't resolve itself. Shortly after the struggle in the yard, another neighbor, a different witness, heard screams coming from a wooded, brushy area near the Simpson home. The screams were desperate, terrified, and then they stopped. Silence. At 10:22 p.m., Suzanne's phone registered its last digital ping. The signal came from the residence. After that, nothing. No calls, no texts, no GPS pings. Suzanne Simpson's digital existence ended at 10:22 p.m. on October 6, 2024. But Brad Simpson's night was just beginning. At midnight, just an hour and a half after the scream stopped, Brad's black GMC pickup truck left the residence. Neighbors with security cameras captured the vehicle leaving. It returned 1 hour later. Where did he go in that hour? At 12:33 a.m., early morning on October 7th, surveillance footage from a nearby H-E-B grocery store captured Brad's truck passing through the parking lot. And here's the detail that everyone fixates on. There was a large ice chest visible in the bed of the truck. An ice chest, the kind you'd use for a camping trip or a tailgate party. Or the kind you'd use to transport something you didn't want leaking. That footage is burned into the minds of everyone following this case. Now, if your wife is missing, if she's just vanished after a public argument and a physical struggle, what do you do the next morning? You call the police, you organize a search, you contact her friends and family, you panic. Brad Simpson didn't do any of those things. Instead, on the morning of October 7th, Brad went shopping. He drove to a Home Depot in Bourne, Texas, a town about 30 minutes northwest of San Antonio, and he bought a very specific list of items: 2 bags of cement, a box of heavy-duty trash bags, a bottle of Clorox bleach spray, a can of insect repellent, an orange construction bucket with a lid. Let's break down that shopping list because every item tells a story. Cement. Why do you need 80 pounds of cement? You use cement to weight things down, to encase things, to make sure they sink in water or stay buried in the ground. Heavy-duty trash bags, not kitchen bags, heavy-duty, the kind designed to hold construction debris or yard waste, or the kind designed to contain something that might leak. Bleach. You use bleach to destroy DNA, to clean up biological evidence, to eliminate traces of blood. Insect repellent. This one is particularly chilling. You need insect repellent when you're working outside, in wooded or brushy areas, places with mosquitoes and ticks, places where you'd be digging or hiding something and don't want to be bitten while you work. And the bucket. A construction bucket with a lid, for mixing cement, for transporting materials, for concealing contents. This isn't a shopping list for a home improvement project. This is a disposal kit. But Brad wasn't done. After the Home Depot trip, Brad drove to a solid waste site in Bourne, then to his ranch property in Bandera County. And here's where the technology becomes important. Brad's phone had GPS tracking enabled. Normally, every movement would be logged, every location pinged by cell towers. But during his trips on October 7th, specifically when he was traveling to the waste site in the ranch, his phone went into lockdown mode. Lockdown mode is a feature on iPhones that temporarily disables certain functions, including location services. You have to manually activate it. Brad Simpson's phone cycled in and out of lockdown mode during the exact hours when he was driving to locations where he might dispose of evidence. That's not an accident, that's forensic awareness. He knew his movements could be tracked, and he was trying to defeat the tracking. On October 9th, 3 days after Suzanne disappeared, Brad finally reported her missing. His story was simple. She'd gone for a walk and never came back. Maybe she'd gone to Austin. Austin was her happy place, he said. But Suzanne's phone was dead. Her credit cards were never used. Her car was at home. She had 4 children who she adored. She had a career, a life, a community. Women don't just walk away from their entire existence without taking anything, without telling anyone, without a single digital trace. The investigation moved quickly. Within days, law enforcement had identified Brad as the primary suspect. They obtained warrants. They searched his truck, his property, his phone records, and they found something damning. An electric reciprocating saw, the kind used for cutting through wood, metal, or bone, was recovered. Brad had attempted to hide it, and forensic testing revealed DNA on that saw. Suzanne Simpson's DNA. Let me say that again. Suzanne's DNA was found on a saw that Brad had concealed from investigators. In November 2024, Brad Simpson was formally charged with murder. But here's the problem. The cruel, frustrating problem that haunts this case. Suzanne's body has never been found. Despite extensive searches, cadaver dogs in the Olmos Basin area, divers in creeks and retention ponds, excavation of the ranch property in Bandera, no remains have been recovered. This creates what prosecutors call a no-body homicide. These cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute. The defense can always argue that without a body, you can't prove someone is dead. Maybe Suzanne did walk away. Maybe she's living under a new identity somewhere. Maybe this is all a misunderstanding. But the evidence tells a different story. The screams that stopped, the suspended phone, the midnight drive with the ice chest, the cement and bleach and trash bags, the saw with her DNA, the lockdown mode covering his tracks. Logic says Suzanne Simpson died on the night of October 6, 2024. Logic says Brad Simpson killed her, dismembered her remains, and disposed of them in a location that hasn't been found yet. But logic and proof are two different things in a courtroom. There's one more detail that makes this case even more disturbing. When investigators searched Brad's truck at a car wash, they found evidence of recent cleaning. Specifically, they found dried cement splashes on the vehicle. Cement splashes from the bags he bought at Home Depot. What was he mixing? What was he encasing? And where did it end up? The searches have focused on several areas. The ranch in Bandera County, where Brad owns property and has access to remote wooded land. The solid waste facility in Boerne, where he visited the day after Suzanne disappeared. The Olmos Basin, a natural area near their home with dense vegetation and water features. But Texas is vast. If you want to hide something or someone in the hill country, there are 1 million places to dig a hole. 1 million wooded ravines and creek beds and abandoned properties. And if you weight remains with cement and submerge them in water or bury them deep enough, they may never surface. Suzanne Simpson's family is living in a nightmare. They know she's gone. They know what happened. But without her remains, there's no closure, no funeral, no grave to visit. Just the haunting knowledge that somewhere in the Texas landscape, Suzanne is still out there. Brad Simpson remains in custody, awaiting trial. He's maintained his innocence, or at least his silence. His defense will undoubtedly argue that the prosecution's case is circumstantial, that buying cement isn't illegal, that cleaning your truck isn't a crime, that without a body, there's reasonable doubt. And they're not entirely wrong. No body cases have been won before, but they require overwhelming circumstantial evidence. They require a jury to connect the dots and accept that the only logical explanation for all the evidence is murder. The trial, when it happens, will be watched closely. Not just in San Antonio, but nationally. It has all the elements that captivate public attention: wealth, privilege, a picture-perfect family hiding dark secrets, and the mystery of a missing body. But for Suzanne's children, this isn't entertainment. This is their mother. This is their family destroyed. On October 6, 2024, Suzanne Simpson attended a party at an exclusive club in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Texas. She wore a beautiful outfit. She smiled in photos. She looked like she had everything. And that night, she disappeared. The perfect lawn, the perfect house, the perfect life. All of it was a lie. And somewhere beneath the surface, buried in cement, hidden in water, or scattered in the hill country brush, the truth is waiting to be found. August 3rd, 1992. Houston, Texas. Let me paint you a picture of Houston in the summer of 1992, because the atmosphere is everything in this case. Houston in August is brutal. The temperature that day hit 95 degrees Fahrenheit, with a low that only dropped to 76 overnight. But the temperature alone doesn't capture it. The humidity was near saturation, 90% or higher. The air was thick, heavy, oppressive, the kind of heat where you walk outside and immediately start sweating, where the asphalt shimmers in waves, where the air conditioning in your car is the difference between comfort and suffering. This was also Houston before the city cleaned up its image, before the museum district gentrified, before downtown became trendy. In 1992, Houston was oil money and urban sprawl, strip clubs and truck stops, highways cutting through neighborhoods like concrete rivers. And at the center of our story is a place called the Men's Club. The Men's Club wasn't some dive bar on a forgotten street, it was upscale. Located at 3308 Sage Road near the Galleria, one of Houston's high-end shopping districts. This was the kind of establishment where businessmen went after client dinners, where oil executives dropped hundreds of dollars on bottles of champagne, where the women who worked there were treated like celebrities. Velvet ropes, valet parking, neon signs reflecting off polished marble. But underneath the veneer of luxury, it was still what it was, a place where women's bodies were commodified, where attention could turn obsessive, where stalking was an occupational hazard. Tara Breckenridge worked there as a waitress. Tara was 23 years old. She was beautiful. Everyone who knew her said so. She was also smart, cautious, aware of the risks that came with her job. She knew that working at a club like the men's club meant dealing with unwanted attention. Men who thought buying a drink meant owning your time. Men who followed you to your car. Men who didn't understand the word no. That's why the men's club had security. That's why they walked the women to their cars at the end of the night. On the night of August 3rd, 1992, Tara worked her shift. It was a busy Monday night, late summer, the club packed with regulars and tourists. She smiled, served drinks, collected tips. She was good at her job. When her shift ended sometime between midnight and 1 a.m., Tara followed the protocol. Security guards escorted her through the parking lot to her car, a red 1986 Pontiac Fiero. If you're not familiar with the Fiero, let me give you some context. It was a sporty little two-seater mid-engine design, fiberglass body panels, distinctive, the kind of car you'd notice on the highway. Tara's was red, fire engine red, which made it even more visible. The security guards watched her get into the Fiero. They watched her start the engine. They watched her drive out of the parking lot and onto the street. She was safe when she left the men's club. That's a critical detail. Whatever happened to Tara didn't happen in the parking lot. It happened after. Tara drove onto the 610 loop. If you know Houston, you know the 610 loop is massive. It's an 8-lane interstate that circles the entire city. A concrete belt of constant traffic, 18-wheelers, commuters, people going everywhere and nowhere. Even at 1 a.m., it's not empty. There are always cars, always movement. Tara's Fiero merged onto the northbound lanes. She was heading home, probably thinking about sleep, about what she'd do the next day. Just another drive on a freeway she'd taken 100 times. And then, something went wrong. At approximately 6:40 a.m., around sunrise, a motorist spotted Tara's red Pontiac Fiero on the shoulder of the northbound 610 loop. The hazard lights were blinking. The driver's door was unlocked. Tara was gone. When investigators arrived, they processed the scene immediately. No signs of a collision, no flat tires, no visible damage to the exterior of the vehicle. The car had simply stopped. Inside, there were no signs of a struggle. No blood on the seats, no torn upholstery, no broken glass. Tara's purse was gone, but that made sense. She would have taken it with her. But there was something else in the car. Something that shouldn't have been left behind if she'd been abducted in a panic. Her mace canister. Still in the car. Tara carried mace for protection. It was her safety net, her last line of defense. If someone had attacked her, if she'd been grabbed or forced into another vehicle, she would have used it, or at least tried to. But the mace was still in the Fiero, unused. There was also a car alarm remote found in the vehicle, the kind you'd use to lock and unlock your doors from a distance. This suggests Tara had gotten out of the car and locked it, or been forced to. But here's where this case becomes truly unsettling. Here's where the mechanical details tell a story that words can't quite capture. When investigators examined the engine, they found something impossible to ignore. The alternator belt was missing. Now, let me explain what that means, because this detail is everything. The alternator belt is a critical component of your car's engine. It's a rubber belt that connects the alternator to the engine's crankshaft. The alternator's job is to recharge the battery while the engine is running and to power the electrical systems, headlights, radio, air conditioning, everything. Without the alternator belt, your car runs solely on the battery's stored charge. Depending on the battery's health and how much you're using the electrical systems, you might get 5 to 15 miles before the battery dies completely. When it does, the engine stops, the power steering stops working, the headlights go out, the car becomes a dead heavy brick. So if Tara's alternator belt failed while she was driving on the 6R10 loop, her car would have started losing power. The dashboard lights would have flickered. The steering would have gotten heavy. She would have had just enough momentum to coast to the shoulder before the car completely died. That's the scenario that makes mechanical sense. But here's the problem. When the belt was examined, or rather, when the absence of the belt was noted, investigators made a disturbing discovery. The belt wasn't broken. It wasn't shredded into pieces and scattered around the engine bay, which is what happens when a belt fails due to wear and tear. It was missing. Completely missing. Alternator belts don't just vanish. If a belt snaps while the car is running, you find the remnants. Pieces of rubber stuck in the pulleys, fragments on the ground, something, but there was nothing, which raises a terrifying question. Did someone remove the belt deliberately? Think about the mechanics of this for a second. The Pontiac Fiero has a mid-engine design, which means the engine is behind the driver, not under the hood. To access the alternator belt, you'd need to open the rear engine compartment. You'd need tools. You'd need knowledge of how the engine works. This isn't something that happens by accident. So if the belt was removed intentionally, when did it happen? Theory 1. It was removed while Tara's car was parked at the men's club. Someone accessed the engine while she was working, removed the belt, and waited for her to drive away. The car would have seemed fine at first, starting normally, driving normally, until the battery drained. By the time it died, she'd be miles away from the club, stranded on a dark freeway. Theory 2, the belt failed naturally, and someone took advantage of her vulnerability. She pulled over, a good Samaritan stopped to help, and something went wrong. But Theory 1 feels more likely. Because think about the precision required. Tara left the men's club around midnight or 1 a.m. Her car was found at sunrise, roughly 6 hours later. That's a long window, but it's also specific. The car didn't die immediately. It died far enough from the club that she was isolated, but close enough to the city that the freeway would still have some traffic. If this was sabotage, it was calculated. Working at the men's club, Tara would have had admirers, men who came in regularly, who knew her schedule, who knew what kind of car she drove, men who watched her walk to that red Fiero night after night. Was someone following her, waiting for the car to fail? Waiting for the perfect moment when she'd be stranded and vulnerable? The 610 loop in 1992 wasn't the safest place to be at 2 or 3 a.m. Even now, it's a stretch of highway where you don't stop unless you absolutely have to. Concrete barriers on both sides, limited shoulders, traffic flying past at 70 miles per hour. If Tara's car died on that shoulder, she would have been in a desperate situation. No cell phone. This was 1992, remember? No way to call for help except to flag down a passing car or walk to an emergency call box. She was smart. She was cautious. She carried mace. But if someone stopped and offered help, especially if they looked official, like a police officer or a highway worker, she might have trusted them. Or maybe she didn't have a choice. There's another detail that haunts this case. Tara wore contact lenses. She had poor vision without them. If she was taken, she likely still had her contacts in, or she had glasses with her. But neither her contacts nor glasses were ever found. Neither was her body. Her clothing that night was specific. A light-colored shirt, blue shorts, sandals, distinctive enough that if they'd been found discarded on the side of the road or in a field, someone would have noticed. But nothing was ever recovered. Tara's boyfriend at the time, Wayne Hecker, became a person of interest. There were inconsistencies in his alibi, reports of a rocky relationship, but nothing concrete ever tied him to her disappearance. No physical evidence, no witnesses placing him on the 610 loop that night. The case went cold. Over the years, investigators have revisited it. They've looked at other unsolved cases from the same era, wondering if Tara's disappearance was part of a pattern. They've chased leads, interviewed suspects, searched fields and construction sites, but Tara Breckenridge has never been found. Here's what we know for certain. Tara left the men's club safely. She was escorted to her car by security. She drove onto the 610 loop in a red Pontiac Fiero, and somewhere on that stretch of highway, her car stopped. The alternator belt was missing. The mace was unused. The door was unlocked. And Tara was gone. The 610 loop is still there, of course. Millions of cars drive it every year. The section where her Fiero was found has been repaved a dozen times. The city has grown up around it. But somewhere in the humid, endless sprawl of Houston, someone knows what happened to Tara Breckenridge. Was the belt removed as sabotage? Was she targeted by someone who knew her routine, who knew her car, who waited for the perfect moment to strike? Or did the belt fail naturally, and she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time when a predator stopped to help? Either way, the result was the same. Tara Breckenridge drove into the Houston night and never came home. Her red Fiero sat blinking on the shoulder of the freeway, a ghost car with no driver, no answers, no justice. Just a missing alternator belt and a young woman who vanished into the smog and sodium lights of a city that never stops moving. 32 years later, her family is still waiting for her to finish that drive, but the highway stays silent, and Tara never arrives. October 10th, 2016, Fort Worth, Texas. Let me set the scene for you, because this case is one of those tragedies where the setting itself makes the horror worse. We're not talking about a dark alley at 3 a.m. We're not talking about a deserted highway or a sketchy part of town. We're talking about the Post Oak East Apartments in Euless, a suburb of Fort Worth, a standard apartment complex, the kind with speed bumps in the parking lot, playground equipment for kids, numbered buildings painted in neutral tones. The weather that evening was pleasant. It was October 10th, early fall in North Texas. The high that day had been about 74 degrees, and by evening it had cooled into the low 60s. Comfortable. The kind of night where you'd sit outside and talk, where you'd wear a hoodie or a light jacket but wouldn't be cold. The moon was a waxing gibbous, about 70% illuminated, which means the night was bright, not pitch black, not the kind of darkness where you can hide easily. The apartment complex would have been lit by street lights, porch lights, the ambient glow of windows. This wasn't a place where violent things were supposed to happen, but they did. Tiffany Johnson was 25 years old. She had a twin brother, Asher, who she was incredibly close to. They'd grown up together, protected each other, been each other's best friend. Tiffany was kind. She was loved. She was starting a new chapter in her life. She'd recently started dating someone new, a good guy, someone who cared about her. She was moving on. But her ex-boyfriend, Christopher Revel, wasn't ready to let her go. On the evening of October 10th, Tiffany was at the apartment with her new boyfriend. They were inside, probably watching TV, talking, just spending time together. It was casual, comfortable. And then Christopher Revel showed up. He wasn't invited. He didn't call ahead. He just appeared, standing outside the building, waiting. Tiffany saw him. And here's where you have to understand the psychology of someone trying to navigate a dangerous situation. She knew Revel. She knew his temper. She knew that ignoring him or refusing to talk to him might escalate things. So she made a decision. She told her new boyfriend she'd go outside and talk to Revel. Just talk. Diffuse the situation, make him understand it was over, then she'd come back inside. Her new boyfriend didn't like it, but he understood. He stayed inside to give them space, to not make things worse by confronting Revel directly. Tiffany walked outside around 9 p.m. She wasn't dressed to go anywhere. She was wearing a pink shirt and black and white spandex pants, the kind you'd wear around the house, comfortable, casual. And here's the detail that will matter later. She was wearing socks, just socks, no shoes. Think about that. You don't go outside in socks if you're planning to leave. You don't walk across a parking lot, across asphalt and concrete in just socks unless you're stepping out for a minute. A quick conversation, a cigarette, something brief. Tiffany had no intention of going anywhere. She walked over to where Revel was standing near his car, a white Ford Taurus. Her brother Asher was watching from the balcony of the apartment. He could see them talking. He watched as they moved to the side of the building, out of his direct line of sight. He didn't think much of it, just an ex trying to talk things out. It happens. At around 9:20 p.m., Christopher Revel came back. He walked up to the apartment and knocked on the door. When Tiffany's new boyfriend opened it, Revel was standing there, sweating, out of breath. He said, "Tiffany left with someone else." Just like that. She got into a car with a friend. She needed to cool off. She'd be back later. And then he grabbed his belongings from inside the apartment, things he'd left there from when he and Tiffany were together, and he walked back to his car. The new boyfriend stood there, confused. Something felt wrong. The story didn't make sense. Tiffany wouldn't just leave without saying anything. She wouldn't get into a car with someone and not tell him. He went outside, and that's when he saw it. Tiffany's car was still in the parking lot, untouched, and sitting on top of the car, placed deliberately or dropped in haste, were her car keys. He looked around, scanning the pavement, the grass, the curb, and then he saw her cell phone, lying on the ground near where Revel's car had been parked. And then he saw the sock, one sock, pink or white depending on the report, just lying there on the pavement. You don't lose a sock while walking. You don't drop your phone and your keys if you're calmly getting into a friend's car. You don't leave one sock behind unless it came off during a struggle, unless you were dragged. The new boyfriend ran back inside and called Tiffany's brother, Asher. Asher had been watching from the balcony earlier. He came down immediately. Together they pieced together what they'd seen. Asher described watching Revel's white Ford Taurus backed up onto the grass near the side of the building. Not parked normally in a space, backed up, close to the building, like he was positioning the car for something, like he was positioning it to load something or someone into the trunk. Asher said he watched Revel standing near the open trunk, looking inside, and then Revel slammed it shut and drove away. They called the police. By the time officers arrived, Christopher Revel was long gone, and so was Tiffany. Now, here's where we need to talk about the physical evidence because every item tells a story. The car keys on top of Tiffany's car. Why would she leave those behind? If she was getting into another vehicle, she'd either take her keys with her or hand them to her boyfriend or her brother. You don't just leave them on the roof of your car, unless you didn't have a choice. Unless someone took you before you could put them anywhere else. The cell phone on the ground. This is the most damning piece of evidence. In 2016, your phone is your lifeline. It's your connection to help, to family, to safety. You don't drop your phone unless you're trying to leave a clue or unless it falls during a fight. Victims do this. They drop their phones deliberately, hoping someone will find them, hoping the GPS can be tracked, hoping it will lead investigators to the truth. And then there's the sock. One sock, not both, just one. You know how a sock comes off during a struggle? Friction. When someone is being pulled, dragged, carried, when their feet are scraping against pavement or grass, socks slip off. It's not voluntary, it's physics. That sock told the story Revel didn't want told. It said Tiffany didn't leave willingly. It said she fought, it said she was taken. The investigation moved quickly. Police identified Christopher Revel as the primary suspect immediately. They searched his white Ford Taurus, and they found Tiffany's DNA in the trunk. Let me say that again. Tiffany Johnson's DNA, her biological evidence, was found inside the trunk of Christopher Revel's car. Revel had claimed she left with someone else. He claimed he had nothing to do with her disappearance, but her DNA was in his trunk. That's not circumstantial. That's not a coincidence. That's proof she was in that car, proof she was in the trunk. But here's the cruel reality. Finding DNA in a trunk doesn't tell you where the body is. The police arrested Christopher Revel and charged him with kidnapping, not murder, because without a body, murder charges are harder to prove. But kidnapping. The evidence was overwhelming. The timeline, the witnesses, the DNA, the physical clues left in the parking lot. In 2019, Revel was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But he never told investigators where Tiffany is. He's never confessed. He's never led them to her remains. He's sitting in a cell, and he's keeping that secret. And here's the part that makes this case even more haunting. This wasn't the first time. In 2006, 10 years before Tiffany disappeared, Christopher Revel had another girlfriend. Her name was Taliba Islam. They had a child together, and one day, Taliba vanished. Revel's story was the same then as it was in 2016. She left. She walked away. She abandoned their child. She just disappeared. Taliba Islam has never been found either. Two women. Both romantically involved with Christopher Revel. Both disappeared under nearly identical circumstances. Both have never been seen again. The pattern is undeniable. But even with all of this, The conviction, the DNA, the history. Tiffany's family still doesn't have closure because they don't have her. Every year, Tiffany's family organizes searches. They comb through the woods near the Trinity River. They search fields, abandoned properties, construction sites. They're looking for anything, a piece of clothing, a bone, a sign that she was there. They know who took her. They know he's in prison. They know he'll never get out. But they don't know where she is. And that's the unique agony of this case. It's technically solved. The perpetrator is behind bars. Justice, in the legal sense, has been served. But for Tiffany's family, for her twin brother Asher, who watched from the balcony and didn't know he was witnessing his sister's last moments, there's no peace. Because somewhere in the woods of North Texas, or buried in a field, or submerged in a creek, Tiffany is still out there. And Christopher Revel knows exactly where. He knows what happened after he backed that white Ford Taurus onto the grass. He knows what he did in those 20 minutes when Tiffany's boyfriend and brother thought she was just talking to him. He knows where he drove that night. He knows where he stopped, but he's not telling. Maybe it's control. Maybe it's the last bit of power he has over the situation. Maybe he knows that as long as he keeps that secret, Tiffany's family will never have full closure. Or maybe he's just evil. On October 10th, 2016, Tiffany Johnson walked outside in her socks to have a conversation. She was 20 feet from her apartment. Her brother was on the balcony. Her boyfriend was inside. She was surrounded by people who loved her in a place that should have been safe. And in less than 20 minutes, she was gone. All that was left was a car key on a roof, a cell phone on the ground, and one sock on the pavement. Those items are evidence. But they're also a message, a silent scream from a woman who fought as hard as she could, who tried to leave clues, who didn't go quietly. Tiffany Johnson deserves to come home. Her family deserves to bury her, to have a grave to visit, to have a place to say goodbye. But until Christopher Revel speaks, until he decides to do one decent thing in his miserable life, Tiffany remains lost. And every year, her family walks through the woods searching, hoping that this will be the year they find her, hoping that the silence finally breaks. August 9th, 2013, Bronte, Texas. If you've never driven through West Texas at night, let me tell you what it's like. It's empty. Not the kind of empty where you see a farmhouse every few miles, the kind of empty where you can drive for an hour and not see another car. Where the darkness is so complete that your headlights feel like the only light left in the world. Highway 277 cuts through Coke County, Texas, oil country, ranch country, the kind of landscape that's beautiful in the daytime and absolutely terrifying at night. During the day, you see the rolling scrubland, the mesquite trees, the nodding pump jacks pulling crude from the earth. At night, you see nothing. Just the yellow line on the asphalt and the vast, pressing darkness on either side. On the night of August 9th, 2013, the temperature had peaked near 100 degrees during the day. By midnight, it had dropped to the mid-70s, but the air was still thick and heavy. The wind was blowing, not a gentle breeze, but the kind of persistent West Texas wind that rattles through dry brush and makes everything sound like movement. The moon was a waxing crescent, barely 4 to 8% illuminated. Functionally, there was no moon. If you stepped off the highway, away from your headlights, you wouldn't be able to see your hand in front of your face. This is the void that Brandon Lawson drove into. Brandon was 26 years old. He was a father of 4, an oil field worker, a guy who knew this landscape. He'd worked these fields, driven these roads. This wasn't some tourist who took a wrong turn. He belonged here. On the night of August 9th, Brandon left his home in San Angelo after an argument with his common-law wife, Ledessa. He was upset. He was driving to his father's house in Crowley, Texas, a 3-hour trip north. Just needed to clear his head, get some space, cool down. It should have been a simple drive. At 12:30 a.m., Brandon called his father, told him he was on his way. Everything seemed fine. At 12:38 a.m., Brandon called his brother, Kyle. His tone had changed. "I ran out of gas on Highway 277, he said. "Can you bring me some?" Kyle said yes. He was about 30 to 40 minutes away, but he'd come. He'd bring a gas can. Just sit tight. It was a standard breakdown, the kind of thing that happens to everyone eventually. You misjudge your fuel, you run on empty a little too long, and you coast to the shoulder. Annoying but not dangerous. Brandon should have waited by his truck. Kyle was coming. Help was on the way. But something changed in the next 10 minutes. At 12:50 a.m., Brandon called 911, and this is where the case transforms from a simple breakdown into something inexplicable. The 911 call that Brandon Lawson made that night is one of the most analyzed, debated, and haunting pieces of audio in true crime history. It's only about a minute long, but every second of it raises more questions than it answers. The call was routed to a nursing home in Robert Lee, Texas, because of the rural location. The person who answered wasn't a trained dispatcher, it was a nurse's aide. She was confused. Brandon was panicked. The audio quality was poor, wind noise, static, heavy breathing. But if you listen closely, if you strip away the noise and focus on the words, you hear something terrifying. Here's what Brandon said. "Yes, I'm in the middle of a field. Stop right there. He's not at his truck anymore. He's in a field. He's left the road. He's left the only source of light, his hazard lights, his headlights, and he's gone into the darkness." Why? He continues, "Push some guys over. We're just right here going toward Abilene on both sides. Push some guys over." What does that mean? Did he push people? Did someone push him? Is he describing a fight? An altercation? Some listeners hear staper, slang for state trooper, instead of pushed. If he's saying a state trooper pushed some guys over, is he describing witnessing a traffic stop? Is he confused, paranoid? "My truck ran out of gas. There's one car here. A guy's chasing me to the woods. Please hurry." Now we have the core of his fear. Someone is chasing him, not just following, chasing, to the woods. He's running. He's terrified. But who? We're not talking to him. Who is we? Is there someone with Brandon? Or is he using we to mean himself and the 911 operator? "I accidentally ran into him." Ran into who? Did he hit someone with his truck? Did he encounter someone on the road? And then the most disputed phrase, "shot the first guy," or "that's the first guy." Some people claim they hear a gunshot in the background. Others say it's wind or static. Brandon didn't own a gun. His remains, when they were eventually found, had no weapon near them. The call ends abruptly. The nurse tries to get more information, but Brandon's description is scattered. He's moving. He's breathing hard. And then the call drops. At 1 a.m., a deputy, Deputy Neal, arrived at Brandon's truck. It was a silver 2000 Nissan pickup parked on the shoulder of Highway 277. The keys were in the ignition. The lights were on. The driver's door was unlocked. Brandon was not there. At 1:10 a.m., Kyle Lawson arrived with a gas can. He saw the deputy. He saw the truck. He didn't see his brother. Kyle called Brandon's cell phone, and Brandon answered. In a whisper, breathless and strained, Brandon said, "I can see you. I'm right here." Kyle looked around. The deputy's lights were flashing. Kyle's headlights were on. The area was as lit as it was going to get in the middle of nowhere. He didn't see Brandon. "Where are you?" Kyle shouted. Brandon said he was bleeding. He said he couldn't come out. He was hiding. And then the call dropped. The phone went to voicemail. The battery had died. That was the last time anyone spoke to Brandon Lawson. Now, let's stop and think about the logic here, because none of this makes sense. Brandon called 911 at 12:50 a.m. He was panicked. He said someone was chasing him, but help arrived 10 minutes later. A cop, his own brother. 2 vehicles, lights flashing, right there on the highway. If Brandon was hiding in the brush, if he could see his brother and the deputy, why didn't he come out? Kyle wasn't a threat. The deputy was there to help. Brandon had called for help, and help had arrived, so why stay hidden? Theory 1. He was afraid of the police. Brandon had an outstanding felony warrant. He knew that if the deputy ran his name, he'd be arrested. So maybe he was hiding from the law, waiting for the cop to leave so he could get gas from Kyle and drive away. But that doesn't explain the terror in his voice. That doesn't explain, "A guy's chasing me to the woods." Theory 2. He was experiencing methamphetamine-induced psychosis. Brandon had a history of drug use. If he was high, he might have been hallucinating, seeing threats that weren't there, hearing voices, running from shadows. His brother, Kyle, later said Brandon had never hallucinated monsters before. But that doesn't mean it couldn't happen. But here's the problem with the hallucination theory. Brandon's remains were found nearly a decade later, less than a mile from his truck. If he was just wandering in a drug-fueled panic, why didn't the search dogs find him in 2013? Why didn't the helicopters with thermal imaging pick up his body heat? And why did he whisper, "I'm bleeding"? Theory 3. Something real happened. Brandon encountered someone, or multiple someones, on that highway. Maybe it was a drug deal gone wrong. Maybe it was a case of mistaken identity. Maybe he witnessed something he shouldn't have. The 911 call mentions guys, plural. Pushed some guys over. One car here. What if Brandon saw a traffic stop or a confrontation on the highway? What if he stopped to help or got too close and someone decided he was a witness who needed to be eliminated? West Texas is a corridor for drug trafficking. Highway 277 is a truck route. It's isolated. It's dark. If you wanted to move illegal goods or deal with a problem quietly, this is where you'd do it. The phrase "accidentally ran into him" suggests an unplanned encounter. Brandon didn't go looking for trouble. He stumbled into it, and then he ran. For 9 years, Brandon's fate was a mystery. His family searched. Private investigators combed the area. Volunteers walked the scrubland with cadaver dogs. Nothing. And then, in February 2022, a search team found human remains in a remote area near Highway 277, skeletal, scattered by animals, about a mile from where the truck had been found. DNA testing took nearly 3 years, but in December 2024, the remains were positively identified as Brandon Lawson. He'd been there all along, right there, just off the highway, in the mesquite and cactus. But the discovery didn't answer the most important question. What happened to him? The Texas Department of Public Safety lists his case as a suspected homicide. Not an accident, not exposure, homicide. That means they believe someone killed him. But who? And why? The 911 call is still the key. Every investigator, every podcaster, every amateur sleuth who studied this case comes back to that call. "A guy's chasing me to the woods." If that was true, if someone really was chasing Brandon, then whoever it was either killed him or drove him so deep into the brush that he couldn't find his way back. The darkness out there is absolute. The terrain is hostile. Mesquite thorns, cactus, uneven ground, rattlesnakes. If Brandon was running blind, panicked, bleeding, he could have collapsed from exhaustion or injury within minutes, or someone could have caught him. The wind that night was blowing at 3 to 7 miles per hour, not strong enough to create the level of distortion on the 911 call. The heavy breathing, the strained voice. That was Brandon. That was fear. He was running for his life. And somewhere in the darkness of Highway 277, in the scrub brush and silence, Brandon Lawson fell. His brother was 10 minutes away. A cop was right there. Help was so close, but it wasn't close enough. Brandon Lawson ran out of gas on a lonely highway. He made a phone call that still haunts everyone who hears it. He whispered to his brother, "I can see you." And then he vanished into the West Texas night. His remains were found 9 years later, less than a mile from where he'd called for help. But the truth, what he saw, who he ran from, why he died, remains buried in the wind and the dark. The desert swallowed his scream, and it's never giving it back. March 10th, 2017. Quinlan, Texas. Quinlan is a small town about an hour east of Dallas. It sits on the shores of Lake Tawakoni, a sprawling reservoir that's popular with fishermen and retirees. It's the kind of place where people know their neighbors, where life moves slowly, where nothing dramatic ever happens. Michael Chambers fit perfectly into that world. He was 70 years old, a retired Dallas firefighter with 36 years of service. The kind of man people called Papa. Dependable, strong, a pillar of the community. He spent his retirement doing what he loved, restoring classic cars in his workshop, spending time with his family, living the quiet life he'd earned after decades of running into burning buildings. On the morning of March 10th, 2017, the weather in Quinlan was mild. The high would reach about 70 degrees with a low in the 30s overnight. It was early spring, pleasant, breezy. The kind of day where you'd work outside with the garage door open. Michael's wife, Becca, left for work around 8 a.m. Michael was still home. They exchanged a quick conversation, normal, routine. She asked him to pick up some mascara from Walmart. He said he would. At around 11 a.m., surveillance footage from the Quinlan Walmart captured Michael walking through the store. He was alone, calm, unremarkable. He bought the mascara Becca had asked for, maybe grabbed a few other things, and drove home in his 2008 Dodge pickup truck. The receipt from that trip was later found in the trash at home. The mascara was on the counter. Michael had made it back to the house. And then, sometime between noon and 5:50 p.m., Michael Chambers disappeared. At 5:50 p.m., Becca sent Michael a text letting him know she was on her way home. No response. At around 6:10 p.m., Becca pulled into the driveway. The house was dark. Michael's truck was parked in the driveway, which was normal. But the workshop, Michael's sanctuary, the place where he spent hours tinkering with engines and restoring cars, was locked. That wasn't normal. Becca called out for Michael. No answer. She tried the workshop door, locked from the outside. She got a neighbor, a former police chief who lived nearby, to help her check the property. Together, they unlocked the workshop door. And that's when they found the blood. There was blood on the workshop floor, not a lot, maybe half a pint. But it was there, visible, red. And it looked wrong. The blood wasn't splattered. It wasn't sprayed across the floor the way it would be in a violent struggle or a sudden injury. It was in circular droplets, precise, almost too neat. And there was a wooden dowel rod lying nearby, with a bloody palm print on it. But Michael wasn't there. His wallet was in the workshop, his keys were in the workshop, his cell phone was in the workshop, but Michael was gone. Now, here's where this case becomes deeply strange. Because the scene in that workshop didn't look like a crime. It looked like a set, like someone had carefully placed evidence to tell a story. But what story? And who was telling it? Let's talk about the blood, because this is the detail that splits this case into two competing theories. When investigators analyzed the blood, they found something unusual. The pattern was circular. When blood falls from a stationary source, like a cut on someone's hand dripping straight down, it creates round droplets. But when blood comes from a moving source, or when someone is struck or injured violently, the drops have tails. They elongate, they show direction and velocity. The blood in Michael's workshop was circular, no tails, no spray, no smears indicating movement or struggle. A private investigator hired by the family, Philip Klein, argued that this indicated staging. He suggested that the blood had been dripped intentionally, either by Michael himself or by someone else, to create the appearance of an injury without an actual struggle taking place. Klein also noted that the blood was bright red. Normally, blood oxidizes over time, turning darker, more maroon. But this blood had stayed bright red for hours, from the time it was deposited, presumably sometime in the afternoon, until it was discovered after 6 p.m. Klein's theory? The blood contained an anticoagulant, something to keep it from clotting, something to preserve its color. Where would someone get anticoagulant blood? Maybe from a medical vial. Maybe Michael had blood drawn recently and saved it. Or maybe, and this is darker, someone had access to blood-thinning medication and used it to stage the scene. But here's the counter-argument. Michael was 70 years old. A lot of people that age are on blood thinners for heart health. If Michael had a cut or a nosebleed, his blood wouldn't clot normally. It would stay liquid longer. And the bright red color could just be a function of oxygenation and the short time frame. So the blood itself doesn't conclusively prove staging. It just raises questions. Then there's the dowel rod. The wooden rod was found near the blood. It had a bloody palm print on it. The question is, was it a weapon used to strike Michael? Was it a tool he grabbed for support after an injury? Or was it placed there deliberately to suggest violence? If someone attacked Michael with the dowel, why leave it behind? Why not take it, dispose of it, eliminate the evidence? If Michael used it for support, why was there no trail of blood leading to a sink or a first aid kit? And if it was staged, who staged it? Now let's talk about what was missing. Michael's wallet and keys were in the workshop. That's critical. If you're leaving, voluntarily or otherwise, you take your wallet, you take your keys, you take your ID, but Michael's driver's license was missing. Just the license, not the wallet, not the credit cards, just the license. Why would someone take only a driver's license? If this was an abduction, maybe the abductor took it as a trophy, or to delay identification of a body if it was dumped somewhere. If this was a voluntary disappearance, if Michael staged his own vanishing, maybe he took the license to ensure his body would be identified later. But then why leave the wallet? And here's the other missing item: Michael's bicycle. An old mountain bike that he kept in the workshop. The family initially disputed that a bike was even missing. They said Michael had bad knees, that he couldn't ride a bike for long distances, that it didn't make sense. But the police insisted. Cell phone data showed movement from the house toward Lake Tawakoni, specifically toward an area near the 2-mile bridge. The movement was slow, about 4 miles per hour, too fast for walking, too slow for driving, bicycle speed. The police theory went like this: Michael staged the blood in the workshop to make it look like foul play. He locked the door from the outside. He got on his bike and rode 17 miles to Lake Tawakoni, weighted himself down, and drowned himself in the lake. It's an elaborate suicide, a Gone Girl scenario. Fake your death to look like murder, spare your family the stigma of suicide, maybe trigger a life insurance payout. But there are massive problems with this theory. First, Michael was 70 years old with bad knees. The family insisted he couldn't stand for more than 30 minutes without pain. Riding a bike 17 miles, especially in windy conditions, wind that day was gusting between 28 and 34 miles per hour, would have been excruciating. Possible? Maybe? Likely? No. Second, the psychology doesn't fit. Michael had a pension, he had a family, he had a new grandchild on the way. He was restoring cars, a project he was passionate about. There were no signs of severe depression, financial ruin, or terminal illness, the usual triggers for elaborate suicide. Third, if he wanted to disappear, why stage the blood? Why create a crime scene that would immediately launch a homicide investigation? Why put his family through that? And fourth, where's the body? For years, the case remained open. Searches of Lake Tawakoni turned up nothing. Divers combed the area near the 2-mile bridge. No body, no bike, no evidence. And then, in November 2022, human remains were found in Rains County, east of Lake Tawakoni, near U.S. Highway 276. The remains were skeletal, scattered by animals, but they were found with an old mountain bike. In May 2023, the remains were positively identified as Michael Chambers. The bike had made the journey, and Michael had too. But the discovery didn't settle the debate, it just reignited it. The sheriff's department closed the case, ruling it a suicide. The bike was there. The remains were there. The cell phone pings had predicted the location. Case closed, but the family and private investigators reject that conclusion. They argue that Michael couldn't have ridden that bike. They argue that the blood was staged by someone else, by a killer, to confuse the timeline. They argue that Michael and the bike were transported to that location, either in a truck or another vehicle, and dumped there. They point to the missing driver's license, the locked workshop, the bright red blood, the staging. And they ask, if Michael wanted to kill himself, why go through such an elaborate charade? But the sheriff's office counters, if someone murdered Michael, why stage a crime scene so badly? Why leave the wallet and keys behind? Why make it look suspicious instead of just making him disappear? Both sides have points. Neither side has definitive proof. Here's what we know for certain. On March 10, 2017, Michael Chambers went to Walmart, bought mascara, came home, and at some point that afternoon, he left his workshop. His truck stayed in the driveway, his wallet stayed in the workshop, his keys stayed in the workshop, and Michael got on a bike, or was put on a bike, and ended up 17 miles away in the woods near Lake Tawakoni. Whether he rode there himself, driven by some desperate plan we'll never fully understand, or whether someone drove him there and left the bike as a prop, we may never know. The workshop was locked. The blood was too perfect. The story was too strange. Michael Chambers was a firefighter. He spent his life running toward danger, saving people, solving problems. And in the end, He left behind a mystery that no one can solve. Was he taken? Was he running from something? Or did the fireman pull one last alarm, staging his own disappearance for reasons only he understood? The workshop in Quinlan is still there. The blood has been cleaned. The tools are back in their places. But the silence remains. And somewhere in the woods of East Texas, near a lake where fishermen cast their lines and retirees watch the sunset, the truth is buried with Michael Chambers. The bike was found. The body was found. But the answer, that's still missing.